I'm honored to present this great speaker today, and I will start by Patricia. Patty Bayo has a PhD from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Her doctoral work focused on the evolution of phenotypes in seabirds, and she conducted fieldwork in the Galapagos and Brazil. We are openly envious, Patty. After returning to her home country to Brazil, she took on a leadership role for the Conservation International. At Conservation International Brazil, she directed the Amazon program from 2009 to 2011, and then she served as the Director of External Affairs from 2011 to 2015. She has worked extensively with NGOs, governments, academia, and conservation networks to advance conservation on the ground. She's dedicated to fostering stakeholder processes and partnership. She's currently based on Honolulu, Hawaii, and again, I express my envy here, as the US Head of Operation for Island Conservation. In this capacity, she works to prevent extinction of native biodiversity, restore island ecosystems, and improve human livelihoods on island through the removal of invasive species. Patty is committed to use the best available science to support meaningful conservation, intervention, and outcomes. I will present Annie too, so that we can really get into the groove of the presentation. Annie Little is a supervisor biologist for the National Park Service at Channel Island National Park in Ventura, California. Annie manages terrestrial wildlife and vegetation programs at the park. Prior to joining the Park Service in 2019, she worked 23 years as a wildlife biologist for the US Fish and Wildlife Service. From 2002 to 2019, she oversaw multiple seabird restoration projects and the reintroduction of the bald eagle to Channel Island. Annie's focused the conservation of unique island ecosystems, including eradication and control of invasive species, habitat restoration, and the re-establishment of native species. Annie is the US coordinator for the Trilateral Island Initiative, which promotes island conservation and collaboration among the US and Canada and Mexico. She graduated from the University of California, San Diego, with a BC in biology, ecology, behavior, and evolution. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we are really excited to hear more about your work on island conservation.
I'll get started, Bea. Thank you very much for the introduction, and Stephanie as well. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to contribute a little bit of our lessons learned to this group. I am impressed with all the work that you guys are doing and all the dialogue that has been going on with the Sydney Restoration Project, and I've heard quite a bit about it from Greg, and so super happy to be here and contribute to the progress that you guys are making. And so my name is Patty, as Bea said, and I work with island conservation. And for those of you who don't know island conservation well, we are an NGO headquartered in California, but with offices in many different places in South America, Southwest Pacific, and here in the US. I oversee our US program and our US-based projects. And the focus and our mission is to prevent extinctions on islands by removing invasive species. So that's really all we do. We're a very focused organization, and our intention and our work is focused on preventing any extinction of species on islands by removing a big threat of the invasive species. So the reason why we focus on islands, as you all know probably, is that islands are pretty special places, and even though they represent a very small amount of land mass on Earth, they carry a disproportionate amount of biodiversity and people. So if you look at some of these numbers, 19% of all living biodiversity are found on islands, and 11% of the world's people call islands home. And so they are home to cultures and to communities and to species that we all treasure. But they're also epicenters and hotspots of extinctions. So about 41% of all the extinctions that we have recorded have happened on islands, 75% of extinctions have happened on islands, and they're continuing on that course of extinctions with about 41% of what we call critically endangered and endangered species, the listed species happening on islands. And if you look at those 75% of extinctions that have happened on island, about 86% of those have had the influence of invasive species. So they've been linked to invasive species as a cause for extinction. So by removing invasive species, you really have a great opportunity to restore islands and prevent extinctions. Islands are small and they are contained ecosystems, so you can pursue eradications successfully and easier than in the continent. So this is just a map that shows a lot of different eradication efforts that have taken place in different parts of the world. So each one of these dots, there's about 1,600 of them, are eradication attempts of all kinds of species, not just rodents, but you have ungulates, rodents, and a bunch of other things. And the success rate is quite high as far as conservation interventions go, with about 85% success rate. But if you look further, and this is a different map, but there's a whole lot more dots on this map. And what this shows is the opportunity that's still ahead of us. And each one of those dots are islands where you have listed species that are under threat of extinction and invasive species that threaten them. So it gives us an opportunity to perform eradications and remove those invasive species to prevent those extinctions. All eradication projects are a means to an end. I don't think anybody involved with eradications are focused on the act of removing the species, but we are focused on the outcome and the potential benefits to the ecosystems that we work on. So it's always a means to an end. And a lot of these projects have documented incredible benefits to native ecosystems. So this is one of those examples, and this is on Palmyra Atoll, which is the Line Islands here in my neck of the woods. But this shows the evolution of Pisonia forest on Palmyra after the removal of rats in 2011. And if you keep on going, we've shown that just a few years after the removal of rats, we've had 5,000% increase of the endangered Pisonia forest on Palmyra, which then obviously has repercussions for seabird populations and all of the other ecosystem services that Pisonia offer to the atoll. So by removing invasive species, we have demonstrated over and over again that native ecosystems recover very quickly after. And beyond just biodiversity, we also know that by removing invasive species, we contribute to a lot of the goals that we as a worldwide community have agreed to, the Sustainable Development Goals. So analysis that Greg was involved with and conservation was involved with have shown that past eradications have helped advance many of these sustainable development goals that go beyond biodiversity. So addressing poverty and other measures of sustainability across the board. So what do we need to do to eradicate species from islands? So it is quite a complex thing to do. By no means is it easy, as you all know. But there are, because we have done it so many times, there are some principles that have been derived from all of those lessons learned and put in one place, and we call them the principles of eradication. So when we set out to perform these eradications, these are the principles that we know we need to follow and implement for it to be successful. So the first one is that all individuals must be put at risk. So your methods have to be able to address every single individual in the population, which is very different from a control effort. So you need to get to the very last individual. So every single one has to be put at risk by your methods. The second one is that you have to remove them faster than they can make more of them, right? So you have to remove them faster than they can reproduce so that you outpace their natural growth. You can't educate your target animals, so the precision of methods has to be taken into account. And this can be done in different ways with different species. One example is if you're trying to eradicate rodents from an island and you use a bait that creates ill effects in the animal very soon after they consume the bait, they quickly learn that by eating bait, they get sick and may not eat enough to receive a lethal dose. And so you're going to have that much harder of a time getting all of the individuals to consume a lethal dose. With other species like ungulates and other things that we typically hunt or trap, you have to be very careful with not educating them about how your traps work and how they can get away from your traps, or if you're missing a hunting opportunity, they quickly learn that, whatever noises you make or whatever ways you used will cause them harm. So don't educate your animals. You want to get every single one of them. So that's very important. A lot of these methods put other species at risk, non-target species at risk. So making sure that those risks are, first of all, recognized, acknowledged, but also minimized and mitigated, throughout your strategies. Obviously, once you've eradicated them, you need to protect that investment. So keep the risk of reinvasion effectively to zero. So you have to have a way to either keep them from getting there again or removing them immediately if they do. And the sixth one is kind of a catch-all, and it's where a lot of the details lie, but it's that the local regulatory, social, and economic conditions must allow you to achieve all the others. So that's where a lot of the dialogue that you guys are in now create those enabling conditions for the principles of eradication to be achieved, right? Typically, these projects follow a structured project cycle that starts with identifying a project, creating enabling conditions and partnerships that will keep thinking about the project and keep creating the conditions for it to be successful. You move into project planning, implementation, and then a wrap-up. But if you look below the line there in this graph, the more important part is that throughout your project, you're doing all of those things at the same time and all of the time. So risk management, stakeholder engagement, communications, fundraising, biosecurity, project management are things that are going to be continuously done throughout the process. So what I thought I'd do, instead of just talking of the theory here, is to kind of bring an example of an eradication that was done following those principles of eradication and some of the challenges that we found on the way to share with you. So Lehua Island is an island here in the main Hawaiian Islands. So it's just off of the coast of Kauai and across the channel from Niihau. It's about 110 hectares. It's a high island, so super important in the context of climate change and refugia for species that will be affected by rising sea levels. It houses one of the most diverse seabird colonies in the main Hawaiian Islands, 17 species of birds, 14 species of native plants. So super cool place, super special place, culturally important for the Niihauans and the native Hawaiians. And as any other eradication, it's a technical, social, and political endeavor, right, to remove an invasive species from an island. So what this slide shows is kind of like some of the technical pieces. So the act of distributing rodenticide bait in every single corner of the island is a technical endeavor that needs a lot of planning and careful evaluation. But on the other side here is all of the agencies and organizations that were partnering to get this done. And I guess what I want to point out is that the value and the importance of partnerships can't be overstated in the context of eradications. And this is a table that kind of exemplifies our partnership here in Hawaii to get Lehua done. And you see here is a public-private steering committee. So there's folks from federal agencies, state agencies, local communities, NGOs, and everyone is bought into a common vision of a rat-free lehua, and everybody agrees that that's the ultimate goal. So this public-private multi-stakeholders steering committee has allowed us to not only create a vision, but create a vision that's representative of many different stakeholders that bring in their own perspectives of why lehua is important to them. It allows us to negotiate different aspects of the project, but also to, in negotiating them, share the risks and own the results of what comes. And so one example of that is that for lehua, we used a less toxic rodenticide to non-target species called difascinone, but we knew that there was a potential higher risk of efficacy failure by using that less toxic rodenticide. But that was the way the partnership decided to go about it. That was the way the state of Hawaii wanted to deal with the eradication on lehua. And by negotiating that aspect of the eradication, everybody's bought into both the benefits of less toxicity to non-target species, but also the potential risks of failure that could come from the use of that. And it is such that there was a very challenging outcome of the lehua operation just a few months after we were done, and we identified rat activity on the island. And but the robustness of this partnership and the fact that we identified that risk prior and agreed on it meant that the partnership stuck together and worked to respond to it appropriately and to continue the dialogue with the community and the public about that outcome. And we are gearing up to confirm the lehua eradication. So we have crossed a mark of 2 years without any rat sightings on lehua. So in a month or two, we will be able to confirm the eradication, should we, knock on wood, continue to see no signs of rats. So the resilience of the partnership is very important because there will always be unexpected outcomes and uncertainty in these projects. The regulatory process here in the US, as I imagine in Canada, is similar, is highly regulated, in particular for the use of rodenticides at this scale. So a lot of different permits and processes, compliance processes that the partnership walked through, and permits that were granted by other agencies to get the work done. And we strived to maintain a high level of community engagement through different strategies. So we used radio shows, printed media, public meetings, one-on-one meetings, and more importantly, we set out a very strong, robust monitoring program post-eradication to test the assumptions of the risks that we assessed early on. So when we did our risk assessment, we did that risk assessment based on what we knew at the time, and those risks were what we thought were possible given the knowledge. But by monitoring after the fact and checking that against our assumptions and communicating that openly and transparently, we're able to show that, in fact, in this case, our assumptions were correct and there wasn't any major non-target issue that derived from the use of rodenticide on the island. So just that continuous transparency of data and findings and post-operational challenges have been really important here in Hawaii. And these are just some examples of the materials that we used. We had very heated public meetings, so it wasn't just easy sailing. We did have very, very heated discussions with the community. A lot of people that were not on board with the decision to use rodenticides. And I'll just end here with kind of an acknowledgement of that engagement, which is positive and negative, as you can see here from the headlines that we got throughout, our planning and implementation on lehua. You have very supportive community members, and you have very skeptical community members, and you have some accusations of potential risks and things, as you know, the bottom corner here is, did the rat poison contribute to the death of 5 pilot whales that washed up months after the operation, for instance? So the Lehua operation was under a lot of scrutiny by the public, and was a lot, as a response, the agencies were very careful on communicating the findings on Lehua. So it isn't without controversy, and this is just one example, but every single project that we've been involved with have had a controversy, and just addressing those issues with transparency is what we strive for. So back to the original question, what does it take to eradicate invasive species? I would say that the most important thing is the common vision. It's that everybody agrees that, in this case, a rat-free Lehua is what we want, or a deer-free Sidney Island is what you want. That strong partnership that is resilient to the controversy, it's resilient to uncertainty and to unexpected outcomes. Obviously, from a technical perspective, it's imperative that all the principles of eradication are followed, and that you meet all of those principles. We can't afford to be non-compliant with any of the regulations, so making sure that legal compliance is taken seriously. And adaptive management, there's always going to have, you're always going to have that loop of new information, new data that is fed into your assumptions and challenge those assumptions. So adaptive management throughout the project is important. So I think that was what I had. Mahalo nui, as the Hawaiians say, and happy to take any questions.
Yes, you have, as Stephanie was reminding you, either the small hand that you can raise, or you can write it in the chat box, and we can have questions for Patty. This group is shy, no question yet. We're typing really quickly.
And that means that I did a good or a terrible job.
I will also let folks know that I'm sure if you can't think of a question now, but something occurs later, we are always happy to take any questions that occur after the fact. You can email Bear or myself, and we'll pass them on to Patty.
Yeah.
Oh, we do have a question from Virginia, who is asking if you are aware of or perhaps have participated in any deer eradication efforts.
Greg probably is the best person to know of all the deer eradications that are ongoing. I do know of an early phase discussion for deer eradication on Catalina Island in California. It's mole deer over there that we are involved with a very early feasibility assessment for that here in the US. But Greg, you probably have the map of other efforts in place.
And we can unmute Greg at the end of the discussion.
Okay, okay, sorry.
So, no, I want to make sure that we give Annie enough time for her presentation if this is not related directly to you, and free you if you need to go.
Sure.
No?
I am not seeing anything else, so I think we will call this concluded for the time being. Patty, this is the second time I've seen your presentation, but I really enjoyed it both times. So you can tell that you have spent years and years and years in this field, and you know your stuff.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Patty. And if you need to go, please feel free to leave.
I can stay to the top of the hour, so I'm excited to hear Annie's. Yeah.
Perfect. So Annie, the floor is yours. And we know that you have bandwidth. So if you have any issues, just let us know.
Okay, hopefully it comes across okay. I've been getting this banner across my screen saying unstable internet. So hopefully this turns out okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me. But we'll just launch in. Thank you again for having me here today. I'm going to be speaking about restoration of the Channel Islands. And I wanted just to first start off, let's see if it'll, okay, here we go. To let you guys know that Patty and I were very fortunate, and we had the opportunity to actually go to Sidney Island in April of 2019 as part of a meeting that was held, the Trilateral Committee meeting, which I'll talk a little bit about later in the talk. But what struck me with that site visit is just all the parallels that we have between the different island projects. No matter what country they're in, what the target species is, we all face very similar challenges and threats, and ways that we can overcome them. There's really just such a benefit to sharing expertise and help guide each other through these kinds of projects. So I really appreciate the opportunity to see that project, and also to talk today about some of our experiences on the Channel Islands. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Channel Islands, there's a group of 8 islands located off the coast of Southern California, and 5 of those islands are within Channel Island National Park. Those are the ones that are highlighted with the green boundary. Santa Cruz Island is actually a public-privately owned island. The Nature Conservancy owns and manages 76% of it, and then the Park Service manages and owns 24% of it. So we really work closely together for the shared management of that particular island. The remaining 3 islands in this group is San Nicolas and San Clemente. Those are both owned by the US Navy. And then Santa Catalina Island is a privately owned island. But we are all part of archipelago that shares common resources, and we work together for conservation across the archipelago. The Channel Islands have been referred to as the Galapagos of North America. We are an international biosphere reserve, and we host over 2,000 terrestrial species, of which 145 of them are endemic, meaning found nowhere else besides the islands. We have single island endemics, such as the Santa Cruz Island scrub jay, seen up here on the top right. And then we also share endemics among islands. And so again, the partnership between the different landowners is really important as we look for conservation, long-term conservation of these species. We also have a very rich marine environment, and we have over 2,000 marine species that are protected by a series of marine protected areas. And this backdrop of biodiversity is in relation to being so close to 20 million people that live off of Los Angeles. So I know that's one parallel. It's like we have a lot of public scrutiny and interest in the islands, given that we're so close to the mainland. The islands are also particularly important for nesting seabirds. We have 15 nesting species on the islands, including the Cassin's auklet, which is a species that we share. We're on the southern end of the range of this species. And the Channel Islands are home to over 99% of nesting seabird species in our region. They're really, truly a haven for seabirds. The islands have had a long and rich history of human influence on them, starting over 13,000 years ago with Chumash communities living on the islands for thousands of years. And then a progression of very different types of uses on the islands, including European explorers, Chinese abalone fishermen, a ranching history throughout the 1800s and into the 1900s. And then our park became a national park in 1980. So we're a relatively young national park. And we are now, trying to restore and recover a lot of the different kinds of ecosystems that we find within the park. And major focus of the management work within the Channel Islands, and particularly the park, has been the removal of invasive species over the last several decades. Everything from rabbits to goats to pigs, rats, cats, deer, elk, and most recently Argentine ants on a couple of our islands. So this has been a big focus of the program, lots of different methods and challenges for a lot of these projects. And today I'm going to highlight two of those for you, just to show the breadth of the kinds of challenges that we're facing and also the lessons learned that we can share with you. And I will mention with these invasives, some of them were, well, actually a lot of these were intentionally introduced for, you know, for food or for livestock or whatever, but some also were accidentally introduced, like the black rat on Anacapa Island was introduced via a shipwreck on the island. So we have an ongoing program of biosecurity to try and prevent future introductions. So the first project I'm going to talk about is the eradication of black rat from Anacapa Island. This is a similar story arc as Patty's with Lahua, but I wanted to acknowledge this project that Greg Howell actually was a main contributor to this project over 20 years ago. This was a really groundbreaking project, not only for the Channel Islands, but also for the US, because it was the first the first time the US had used aerial application of rodenticide. And we were using the techniques that had been pioneered in New Zealand, and we were applying them to the US. So this was really an important project from an eradication standpoint, particularly for rats on islands within the US. So the project goals were to primarily restore seabird nesting habitat, to protect the endemic native deer mouse that we had out there, which we knew was going to be severely impacted from the project because we were using a rodenticide to eradicate the black rat. And also just to have overall ecosystem restoration, you know, looking at raptors, reptiles, intertidal invertebrates. Rats are very opportunistic and can influence ecosystem function across the board. So really this kind of project has very significant benefits across the ecosystem. Some of the challenges that we encountered with this project was steep, rugged topography. How are we going to get bait into every potential territory for rat? We had nesting California brown pelicans, which at the time were federally endangered. We have the endemic deer mouse on the island, you know, a species to Anacapa Island. So we wanted to make sure that we protected that. We were using new methods in the United States. And as Patty kind of did an overview of all the different permitting requirements, it was a very lengthy permitting process, in part because we were using new methods and techniques and needed to get buy-in and approval from a variety of agencies. Also, these projects are very controversial, and with a large population, you know, right off the coast, watching these projects, watching what we're doing, there was a lot of public scrutiny, and we had several legal challenges against the project. So this project was successful. It was implemented over 2 years, and I wanted just to highlight some of the lessons learned from it. The first one was to include international and national experts, and that partnerships were absolutely essential to the success of this project. The Park Service definitely wouldn't have been able to implement a project like this on its own, and particularly because they were new techniques and we hadn't had experience with those. And we needed partners with specific expertise like island conservation and some of our international partners from New Zealand to come in and really help support the project and help guide us through it. The premise of having very sound and scientifically based decision-making process was very important, so that when the project was challenged in the courts, we had clear and sound scientific reasons for why we were going ahead with the project. So that having that lens during the project planning and making sure that we clearly articulated why we were doing this project and the science behind it. Patty mentioned this as well, the idea of transparency, and I think that's a really important theme as well to echo with all these projects, that it's very important to clearly identify the potential risks from these projects. You may not know what all of the impacts may be, but you do your best to identify what those are and to estimate what are those potential impacts, and to clearly put it out there. We don't want to have the appearance that we're trying to hide anything from this project. It's much better to just be upfront and acknowledge that there could be non-target risk. This could be the scope of it, and we're going to closely monitor those impacts. Don't rush permitting. This, as you launch into these kinds of projects, it does take a long-term commitment, but it's really important to get it right and to do it right along the way. Otherwise, there will be holes within the project planning process that make the project vulnerable to successful implementation. So it's a long-term commitment to implementing these kinds of projects, many years of upfront planning, and oftentimes the execution is done very quickly relative to the upfront planning, but it's really important in the long term to do a complete job with the permitting. The robust monitoring program is invaluable. With this project, we had really good baseline data for our seabird populations, and we demonstrated clearly what the impact was from the rats on our seabirds out there. Then after the project was implemented, we continued to monitor on an annual basis the response. And that was really important, not only to, to document what the benefits were of the project and help justify why we did the project in the first place. But these data sets are extremely important just on a global scale to further justify the eradication, these types of eradication projects, that you may have a short-term impact, but the long-term benefits of these projects outweigh those short-term impacts. And it's really the monitoring that helps create that story and to further justify it, within your park or within your country or on a global scale. So we really build upon all the eradication projects that go before ours and the data and the information that we gain from those. So this is just a quick example of a data summary that we had of our responsive seabirds pre and post project. We had a very clear increase in the number of nests and the number of clutches for our seabird. This is for the Scripps' murrelet, one of our rare, unique seabird species. And having this kind of data and visual is just really important in again, illustrating the benefits of these kinds of projects and why we do them. We also, another important of having a robust monitoring plan is just documenting, again, the changes. And with the case of Anacapa, we documented new breeding species on the islands, including the ashy storm petrel, which is a rare endemic seabird to Southern California and Northern Mexico. So this species came on, was first documented about 5 years after the project. So if we had only monitored the project for 2 years after it was done, we would have possibly, you know, not captured that we had a new breeding species after implementation of the project. So the second project I wanted to highlight was the restoration of seabirds on San Nicolas Island. This was one of the Navy-owned islands. And this project was, again, another state and federal multi-organization partnership with support from NGOs such as Island Conservation and the Institute for Wildlife Studies. And we also had a unique partnership with the Humane Society of the United States, which I'm going to focus on the development of that partnership with this project. So some of the challenges with this project was one, non-target species. We have an endemic island fox on San Nicolas Island, San Nicolas Island fox. And this species is actually smaller than your typical house cat. It's a descendant of the mainland gray fox, but over time it has evolved and it's into its own separate subspecies on the different islands. And that was that presented a really unique challenge just in terms of the available methods that we could use to eradicate cats from the island and making sure that we adequately protected that species. Having it be a Navy-owned island created its own set of logistics and challenges, just different missions that we have, and military operations being a challenge to overcome in terms of the island being closed at certain times of the year and being able to access the island for the eradication project. The permitting process, as I mentioned, you know, these are long-term efforts. This one took a little less than the Anacapa project, about 5 years. And then, of course, one of the challenges was just the controversy. Cats, you know, are an important pet, and there's very strong and organized groups that support feral cats on, you know, just across the country. And in light of that, we knew that this project was going to be controversial, and we decided that we would get organized up front and really take on that controversy sort of in just a realistic and proactive manner. So we went out, you know, through the public process that we have. We created our own particular website to help disseminate information about why are we doing this project? Why is this project important? We held public meeting, and as expected, through the public process, we received quite a lot of opposition, over 5,000 public comment letters, and organized opposition from groups such as the Humane Society of the United States, Alley Cat Allies, and other feral cat groups. Of course, we also received strong support from conservation groups, but our challenge primarily was to work through the opposition, because it was clear that this project was not going to move forward for many different reasons if we didn't achieve some level of understanding from some of these opposition groups. So during this process, we initiated discussions with the Humane Society in the United States, and based upon their engagement, we decided to take that a step forward and create a memorandum of agreement with them. And part of that agreement was that we invited them out to the island, out to San Nicolas Island, and they were in particular interested in exploring alternative ways to trap cats that they felt would be superior to the ones that we had proposed. They were also interested in trying to look at alternatives to euthanizing the animals on site in terms of doing a live removal of the animals. So it was it probably was a year-long process working with them to try and see if we could come to a mutual agreement that was satisfactory to both sides, I guess, or all the interested parties. And what we ended up doing in the end was we ended up actually trapping and removing the cats off island. And the Humane Society created a permanent facility on the mainland. These cats, by and large, because they were truly feral, they were not adoptable, that they created a cat sanctuary for them to live out the remainder of their lives on the mainland. And they actually created a website with cat updates, and so that folks could track, you know, how this population was doing. And I know this is a really unique circumstance, and oftentimes on island projects, something like this would not be able to occur and is not feasible. But this project really showed just, you never quite know, and to think outside the box and try and engage with partners. You may come into an opportunity for a unique partnership that wouldn't have been otherwise apparent. That wasn't something, you know, removing cats off island to a facility was something that we hadn't really considered as we were planning the project, but that's what we did in the end. Another strategy is by actually, you know, really engaging with the Humane Society. We struck common ground. By having them out on the island, they really truly understood how unique these island ecosystems are and why cats don't belong there. And I think it was much more of an understanding of why we needed to remove the cats, and not just, for example, have a trap, neuter, release program for them long term. That it was important to remove the cats permanently from the island. So that engagement led to this common ground for understanding. With this partnership, and you know, it did create just different kinds of challenges and just considerations. So one thing was just to be clear about what the roles, expectations, and deadlines were regarding moving forward in any kind of partnership like that. Also, just an overall lesson learned from this project was just the need for clear and strategic communication, because these projects are controversial, and we decided to have a concerted effort to centralize the messaging and speak with a single voice across all of our partners. And that was really important, that we were all on the same page, that we took the time to put together a robust communication plan, you know, as prior to the project, and as the project was being implemented, keeping it updated and adaptively working with the project, and keeping those consistent messages was also important. So that was the last with that. I did just want to do a final quick plug-in for partnerships, because really all of these projects can't be done without partnerships. And it's really great with the Sidney Island project. You guys have 7 different partners engaged. And I think that's really the way to go, that you have this long-term buy-in from all the different partners. So in that vein, there's a trilateral committee between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And this has been an entity that has been meeting on an annual basis. It's the natural resource agencies from the 3 countries, and they work together on issues of common concern and shared species and joint initiatives. And under that umbrella of the Trilateral Committee, we, a group of us that are island practitioners in Canada, Mexico, and US, created this Trilateral Island Initiative. And we have this letter of intent that was signed almost 7 years ago now. And the goal of the letter of intent is to strengthen the collaboration between our 3 countries on the conservation and restoration of islands. And we really, that was the point of that site visit out to Sidney Island, to share expertise and engage with practitioners in the 3 different countries that can really help support each other through these different kinds of projects, both eradication projects, but also restoration, because that's just the start, right? Eradications are just the start, and there's a lot of work to do after that point. So the Trilateral Island Initiative, just so everybody's aware, these are our focal areas: invasives, and then biosecurity, restoration, supporting local communities and engagement, research and monitoring, and climate change. And we have a whole group of partners from all 3 countries that are engaged: federal partners, NGOs, research organizations. And so I just encourage you all, as you move forward with your project, to engage these other entities. There really is, the island community is really special. I have found, working now on islands for a long time, that everybody is invested in the success of these kinds of projects. And every successful project helps the next project move forward, and every speed bump helps inform the next one to move forward as well. So I think it's really important we continue these types of partnerships and reach out. And I just wanted to end on that note, that there's a lot of resources out there if you guys, if you need additional support or feedback on any aspects of your project as you move forward.